first edition of the Nahar Jito Bookathon presented in association with the Raisoni Foundation. In this session, we explored the book Ultimate Grandmother Hacks 50 Kick-Ass Traditional Habits for a Fitter You by Kavita Devgan. Traditional eating habits are a delicious roadmap to a happier, healthier, kinder you. Our ancestors have a lot to teach us about hearty eating habits that not only focus on health but also the pleasure that food can bring to our lives. This book is an amalgamation of many of those old school ideas that modern nutrition is now trying to catch up with. It is an enticing guide to inculcate time-tested food habits so we can develop a healthy lifestyle and, even more importantly, rediscover the enjoyment of food. Our speaker for today, Kavita Devgan, is an acclaimed nutritionist with 20 years of experience as a weight loss and holistic health consultant. She offers practical, customized programs that deliver weight loss the right way through modification of habits to ensure long-term results. She is also a popular journalist and health columnist and has been writing regularly for premier media groups. While she is an excellent counselor, her heart lies in propagating right information through her writing. A prolific and feted speaker, Kavita has been giving lectures and conducting workshops about the right way of eating and new research-based health trends for a long time now. Her previously published books are Don't Diet, 50 Habits of Thin People, Ultimate Grandmother Hacks, and most recently, Fix It with Food. Our moderator for this session is Dr. Shakti Sharma, and she has a doctorate in food and nutrition and has qualified UGC NET. She's working as head of Home Science Department at Sadabai Raisoni Women's College, Nagpur. Her expertise extends beyond the realm of academia. She's also a dedicated clinical nutritionist, successfully running a diet clinic, Nutrition and You, since more than 7 years. Her unique perspective incorporates the principle of naturopathy and the application of Ayurveda in diet planning, offering a well-rounded approach to wellness. I would now like to hand over the session to our moderator.
Let's explore some key themes from the book with our guest, Kavita Devgan. Welcome, ma'am, to our today's talk series.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, your interest in traditional food habits. So, what inspired you to delve into this topic, and what your personal experience or stories shaped your perspective about this traditional eating?
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about this book, which is very close to my heart, Shakti. This was my second book. It came out in 2017. There have been many more books after that, but this one somehow stays very close to my heart because the genesis of this book was very interesting. This book came out of the lessons that I learned growing up at home from my mom, literally. So the common sense nutrition lessons, staying healthy lessons, eating right lessons that I learned as I grew up. And then when I studied nutrition, I realized most of them were so practical and so commonsensical, and they were bang on target. So I realized that what we were practicing at home, just because it was common sense, actually science tells us that they're true. So that is how the genesis of this book actually, began. Because I realized that what we are doing today is that in our pursuit for running after what's new, the new fangled diets and new researchers that keep coming in, they keep confusing us. What we are doing is we are forgetting the time-tested rules that have, stood the test of time, literally, so to say. They have kept generations healthy. But today we don't take them seriously just because they are traditional, so to say. So I wanted to put all these habits together in one book format and simplify them for the next generation, for my generation, of course, but also for the next generation. Because I felt that today, even we are forgetting the good things, the good habits that our parents used to follow or our grandparents used to follow. So what hope is there for the next generation, for my son, for your child, how will they even know how our elders used to stay healthy? So that is how I just compiled those habits together. And they're not very ancient habits that they're going back decades. I have just gone back maybe 2 generations and have compiled them together in 3 sections: mind, lifestyle, and food. Because I believe that just food alone is 1/3 of the recipe. You need to change your lifestyle along with it, and you also need to ensure that your mind is healthy. Only then you will get holistic nutrition. So this is how this book came about, and I wrote it one chapter at a time. I was doing a column at that time for Daily India Today. So some of these ideas I wrote about there, and there was a lot of acceptance. So I felt the time was ready to bring it out in the form of a book, and basically it should be there ready as a reckoner for the next generation, so that they don't forget all these healthy habits.
It's amazing to listen from you. So traditional eating is really important. And we have seen that traditional eating often emphasizes natural, whole foods, simple preparation methods. These habits can provide a balanced and nutritious diet, often aligning well with modern nutritional advice. But however, there are challenges. Method, it clashes with the modern science of eating and cooking. So how do you see these habits complementing or sometimes challenging modern nutritional advice?
I'll be very frank with you, Shakti. I have not. My experience till now has been, I'll tell you a small anecdote. While growing up, if there was something I could not understand, my mom would say, "Just do it. It's proven over time. Even if you think it's not verified so much by a research or science, just follow it and trust me." I'm glad I did, because as the time has passed, most of those rules are being proven right by science. So modern science or modern nutrition as we look at it. In fact, I feel, my personal opinion is that probably modern nutrition has a lot to catch up on still, because there are so many other rules and habits that I feel have not been verified yet, but it's a matter of just some time. A simple example, when we would eat roti, my mom would smear some ghee on it, right? And I would be like, "No, we can't have ghee. How can we have ghee? It's saturated fat," right? What is modern science or nutrition saying today? That ghee is essential, and more so on your roti, because when you put it on wheat, you bring down the glycemic index of that roti that you're eating, So this is just one example. Other examples, it was non-negotiable to drink water first thing in the morning. Hydrate yourself. Today, there's so much talk going on about hydrating yourself first thing in the morning. So lots of habits like these, things like eating raw onions with our meals. It was there for lunch as well as for dinner. Non-negotiable. Half a raw onion for everyone. Why, we would ask? We were told it's good for you. So maybe that generation did not knew the nitty-gritties of how it was helping, but they knew it was helping. And today we know how much raw onion can really benefit us. So all these things, I feel modern nutrition is probably only catching up with ancient nutrition. But still, your point could be correct. There are some places where there are clashes, and some are very valid clashes as well. But most of the clashes, I feel, are only happening if you're not following the traditional wisdom the right way. If you are tweaking it for your own benefit, then obviously it is probably not good for you. But if you're following it exact as it was earlier, then I don't think there'll be any clashes literally. Modern science is only proving right what we were following earlier.
I think when we come to talking the traditional and the modern sciences, it brings me to a very, very important topic, and that is fasting. We always had the custom of doing fasting, which somehow got lost. People started saying कि fast करने से किसी की उम्र नहीं बढ़ती. Although I also know, being a nutritionist, that we don't fast for a husband's long life. We fast for our own life, because doing fasting always causes autophagia. Yeah. So can we have something on traditional fasting and the so-called intermittent fasting of today?
Yeah, so you're right. Earlier, fasting was a part of, it was a way of living. It was ingrained in the way people would live their lives. It was given a religious connotation. So, you would fast on a particular day for a particular god, and you would fast on a special day You would fast on for Navratras for a certain time. But even those are now coming true. First, let me address that. If you're doing it for a particular god, then it's not that it's pleasing that god. Fine, it is pleasing that god, but it is also ensuring discipline. You are making sure that every Tuesday you would fast, come what may. Okay. The other thing that a fast earlier would, do for us was that they were, if you see that scientifically they've been placed in just the right times of the year.
Right.
Navratras are done at the cusp of changing season. And that's when our immunity is at the lowest, and we need to ensure that we cleanse our body and move to the next season with a ready body. So the timing was just right. So that is about the timing, and that is about addressing the religious connotation. So if a religious connotation makes sure that you can follow a fast diligently, what is the harm in doing it like that? But if you want to fast for health reasons, that's a good enough reason as well, I personally feel. Fasting does a lot of things to our body. One, like you mentioned, autophagia, it helps ensure that it rejuvenates our cells and gets rid of the dead cells from the body, increases our ability to cleanse the body completely, all the organs, let certain organs recover. So that is another thing. Not just digestive system, as most people think that it's like giving your digestion a rest. It's also giving your circulatory system a rest. It's also giving your lymphatic system a rest. So your body can work at cleansing or removing the toxins from your body. So our body is a fabulous machine. It can heal itself, even if we don't fast. We know that. But that is only in the ideal circumstances. And we don't live in ideal times. We do mess up with food. There is stress. There is environmental pollution. There are so much pesticides that we're eating. So doing a fast once in a week, maybe twice in a week, once in a month, whatever works for you, is a brilliant idea, because it just starts your body fresh. That there is no doubt that fasting helps us. But that said, overdoing it is wrong. Some people just go on long fruit detoxes. That could probably be detrimental to the liver if their liver is already a little compromised. Some people go on fruit juice cleanses. Again, not such a great idea. So the idea of fast is to eat food. What were the rules of fasting earlier? Eating an antioxidant-rich diet, which is like a mix of fruits and vegetables, hydrating yourself very well, eating food which is easily digestible, right? And eating within a small window so that you give your body some time to, rest otherwise. But today, fasting has become almost equivalent to feasting in most of the times. So if you're fasting, you see people having fried food, you see people having things that they probably wouldn't even on regular days, just because they're fasting and they feel, pressured. So that is probably not helping them. So idea of fast is to do it, but do it the traditional way, is what I tell everyone. And which is, what is intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting is just a fancy name given to, detoxing your body once in a while. But intermittent fasting also, people are, while people get very attracted towards it because it's come from the West, but the problem with intermittent fasting is there are multiple types of intermittent fasting. And there are people doing it all wrong again. If you're eating within a small window, but you're eating all wrong food, it is not going to help you. And if you're eating in the wrong window, that is a mistake I see more people make, that they're not eating when your digestive system is on fire, which is in the first half of the day, but they are beginning eating at like 5 maybe and eating till 10 at night. It's not just the number of hours. It's also when you're eating. Are you eating according to your circadian rhythm? Earlier, traditional fast, people would get up in the morning, eat only at sunrise and not eat after sunset. That is the perfect way of fasting. If you do that every day, you probably won't need a detox or a strict fast ever. You know?
So moving from fasting,
Yeah.
let's move to healthy eating now. So I read in your book you have mentioned about a balanced thali. So that's a wholesome eating now coming up for the listeners now. So how can you elaborate on the concept of a balanced thali?
Yeah. So again, here I just have to. Here there is clash probably with not with modern science. Modern nutrition never asks you to give up on anything. But all these fad diets ask you to give up on some or the other macronutrient. You know, some diets will say stop eating carbs. Some diets will say only eat fat. Balanced thali, if you look at it, was such a sensible idea. It was literally like a genius idea, I would say. A thali which has a little of everything, make sure that one, you're doing portion control without really having to do portion control, without having that pressure on your mind that I need to eat only this much. Second, you're eating variety. So you're giving your gut a little of everything. So you're ensuring that your gut microbiome, gets a taste of all and it's thriving. You have bacteria for digesting every kind of food, and it's a good gut health, habit, literally eating a little bit of everything, eating variety. And third, it ensured the Ayurveda rule of eating or balancing all rasa. Eating a little bit of sour, eating some sweet, eating something bitter, something salty. So it was ensuring all a balance of all flavors also. So that thali would give you satisfaction because you did not feel deprived. You did not feel that you had to give up something. There was enough satiety because there was enough fiber, protein, carbs. So you would not have to munch on something a few hours later. You would also, like I said, eat variety. So your gut will be happy and you're getting a little bit of beta as well. So which keeps your sweet taste satisfied. A balanced thali was perfect. I think the point where we all went wrong was when we gave up that thali system and we moved to the serving for ourselves. I just feel that if we could go back to just that little thali system where there were katoris of different things, and one doesn't have to do big thalis like given in restaurants. It could be one curd thali, one curd katori, one dal katori, one or two sabzi katoris, and a little bit of carbs. And I think that was probably a better way of eating because there was automatic portion control also, I feel.
Ma'am, in your book, while I was reading now, you have very well talked about this, the rasad that you talked about.
Yeah.
We always love to eat the sweet, the sour, and you've got a very practical way of incorporating the bitter in your taste.
Yes.
Like how you should not directly go to Karela, but at least have a orange rind in your cakes or some, coffee on the browning. So I would like to highlight on that point. It's very beautifully written in your book.
Yeah, so that is my favorite topic. I'm so glad you've asked me because hardly anyone asks me about bitter. Somehow, luckily, I think I just love bitter foods. I've always loved it. But because I also feel it's not that I've always loved it, tastes are also developed.
Yes.
When you're growing up, what you find tasty can be something that you can inculcate as well. So you can inculcate taste for healthy foods. I've seen that over years with children, especially if you begin right when they are small and you ensure that they eat healthy, but you give that healthy food to them in a tasty way, that they start equating taste with healthy foods. So I have personally always loved bitter food. So I love Karela. I mean, everyone knows that. I just love that, not just in the form of sabzi. It can even be, a Karela juice. If someone's not having it, I have it. It's literally like that. Bitter element is what is lacking in most of our diets. Everyone manages to eat sweet, sour, salty. In fact, sometimes excess of those. But bitter is almost always, whenever I do an audit of my clients as well, I see that missing. One, I see fruits missing, and second, I see the bitter component missing. These are two big gaps always. Why is bitter so important? Bitter element is important to cut your inflammation in the body. Bitter element is important to cool your body from inside because it's something that just keeps the body temperature in right place. And if you'll notice, in all the foods, the the compound which is giving them bitterness is the health-giving compound. It's almost always an antioxidant. So in the orange drink, like you mentioned, which is a favorite with me, I love to do that. Just put it in the orange drink, the nimbu drink, the lemon drink I put everywhere. Methi seeds, things like broccoli, the compound in it, which gives it a little bit of bitterness, or in kale.
Yeah.
They are all antioxidants which completely cleanse your body, reverse illnesses, and prevent diseases from happening. So, consciously, if everyone can include, you don't have to get into the nitty gritties, but if you can make a list of like 5, 6, or maybe there are 7, 8 options of bitter foods, and make sure that you have at least one of those every single day without fail in the form that you like it. All you need to do is whatever you're making, just put in some orange drink. You won't even notice the taste. If you're making something, just put in a little bit of spinach or broccoli in it. There are multiple ways of including bitter element, and there are multiple foods that give us. Raw onion has a bitter element in it. So all of these things will make sure that you can prevent infections. You can keep inflammation down, because inflammation today is the root cause for most of the diseases I'm seeing. Almost everyone, their body is inflamed. That is why they're getting the disorder that they're getting. So if you can start including bitter elements in your diet, you'll be able to. That can be like the best preventive step you can take ever. Even if you don't like it. If it's too late for you to start liking it, the taste doesn't matter. Just have it as medicine. It's still better than medicine, I feel. And for children,
definitely.
And for children, I feel you should start inculcating that bitter taste habit right from childhood. You will do them great service.
Absolutely. It's great talking about these things, ma'am. I have few more questions from your book, but before that, I want to ask you, you always talk about the importance of mindful eating. We should not just eat, but we should have the pleasure in eating. So my first question would be, what is this about of mindful eating, and what is the benefits of eating together as a family? Why you stress so much emphasis on it, and what is the scientific reason behind this?
Yeah. So food is not just nutrition. I think this is again where we go wrong. When we just look at food and only look at protein, how much protein is there? Does it have any fat in it? I think we just start going wrong just from there. Food is pleasure as well. You have to equate food with pleasure. It cannot just be nutrition, because you're straight jacketing it like that, and that is a big mistake, and that is where we start going wrong. You need to look at food in the composite way. It is going to give you nutrition, obviously. This is what our body will thrive on, but it is also pleasure, because we need pleasure as well in life. If you're not happy, then everything starts going wrong, literally, because even if you're eating the best of the food, but you're stressed, we all know what happens. You will still be more at risk compared to someone who's probably not eating well, But there is solid science behind it. When I was growing up, it was very clear in a house that the food has to be tasty. In fact, not just in my house. Earlier, I have rarely seen a dadi or a nani eat food which is bland. They would not eat it. The food had to be tasty. There was simple common sense behind it, that if you're eating something, you need to get pleasure out of it also. It's up to you how you make healthy food tasty. That is a different story together. So growing up, it was very clear in the house, and that is what I've emphasized on in the book and explained the reasoning behind it, which is what I do in my books. I don't like to just preach, because what is the point? You're not talking to dumb people out there. You need to give them logic so that they understand it, and then they start following it. When you're eating something, or even forget eating, when you look at a food which is appealing to the eyes, or looks delicious, or something that you really enjoy eating, what happens first? Your mouth starts watering, right? So your digestive system starts working in anticipation. Your digestive juices get released, and what you're eating will probably be assimilated and digested much better. and your body will be able to draw more nutrients from it. Simple logic. But if you're trying to, push through or boiled cabbage or something equally tasteless down your throat, what is going to happen? The food will probably just go in, the stomach will keep sleeping, it will just go in and go out. You'll probably not be able to absorb any nutrients from it. And the science is very clear on that. When you're eating food that you enjoy, you absorb many more nutrients from it, and your body likes it. So that's the simple logic behind eating tasty food. As simple as that. And eating together, like what you mentioned, again, extremely important, because I believe that food memories are what shape you.
Okay.
It's not just what are you eating, it's also how you're eating it, when you're eating it, where you're eating it. All these questions, answering all these questions and covering all these bases is equally important. So just what you're eating is just 1/4 of the whole equation. So when you sit down and eat with family, you enjoy your meal, you are eating in a calm, happy atmosphere. So when you're eating in a calm way, your body is also able to absorb food better. Plus, you're making food memories. So that works on your mind and that works on your digestion, because gut and the mind are both connected. So making these food memories together is not just great for families, because it builds that solid bond with the families. When you know that it's non-negotiable that dinner has to be together or breakfast has to be together. I mean, today I understand it's not possible to do all meals together. It's impossible, in today's lives that we live in. But you can at least keep a target of one meal every day together. And if supposing it doesn't happen on 2 days a week, doesn't matter. At least you've done it 5 days a week. But if you don't have a rule, you'll probably end up eating one meal a week, which is, or maybe not even that. And also another thing is, when you're eating together, you're eating the same food and there is an unconscious check on what you're eating. Unlike when you're eating in your own rooms, everyone is ordering their own food. So there is no check on what is the child eating, how much is the child eating, what is the husband eating, should he be having that pizza or not if his HB1AC is high, and you are probably going through menopause, so you just digging into a bowl of ice cream later because there's no one to keep a check on you. But whereas if you're sitting down together and eating, everyone would eat the same food, and you would probably have that ice cream, but everyone would have like a scoop because you share it. And also, when there is enough study now that when you sit, this is just family I'm talking about, but if you do shared eating, community eating, there are enough studies that show us that this kind of eating makes us better people. In fact, there's a chapter there. We will not do that today, but that chapter, in fact, can be an old book and can be an entire discussion in itself. How food, what you eat, and how you eat shapes you as a person, can make you a better person, bitter person. So what you eat also goes to, because everything is connected. Your mind, your brain, your heart, your gut, every single organ is connected. Then you do not work in a disjointed manner, which is why eating together is so important.
I think, ma'am, your book brings us to that understanding that health is not only absence of disease.
Yeah.
And in a chapter, you always talk about slowing down. That is looking at holistic health and not merely absence of disease. So what is this concept of holistic health for you?
So holistic health, the very definition of holistic is something that takes everything into perspective. So we are here talking about not just the food that we're eating, but also, like, for example, what I mentioned, how we are eating it. But food is, again, one part of the holistic, story. Other part of the holistic story is in what mood are you eating in? So which is where gratefulness comes in, whether you're grateful for the food that you're eating or not, which is where sitting down calmly and eating comes in. So whether or not your hormones are stable, your cortisol hormone is at the lowest, when you're sitting down and eating, or are you just picking up something from the table and rushing and eating in the car when you're in the traffic area, or you eating when you're very angry, when people are angry or upset, then they eat. So even that concept comes in. So it's that entire thing of what you're eating, where you're eating, how you're eating. All of these make the whole concept of holistic eating. And here your lifestyle also comes into the picture, which is why I've spoken a lot about, written in fact, a lot about your exercise, because exercising right, not just exercise. A lot of people do wrong exercising. Exercising right is a very, very important part of living a holistic life. Whole for me is WHOLE, whole, all of it. So whole foods, exercising right, making sure that you have some me time or some activity you do every day which gets your stress hormones back to ground zero, day in and day out. Don't let stress connect. The times we live in, there's bound to be stress. Saying that you can't have stress, we are not living in our grandpa's time where they could just have afternoons free, just sitting in. I really remember those times when we would probably end up eating half the mutter when we were peeling them, even eating the peels, because we were not worried about pesticides at the, those times, or eating, having a mango eating competition in afternoons. Today's children barely get any summer holiday, so in today's circumstance, your best bet is to ensure that you get that, even children, get that 1 hour, half an hour of just not doing anything time. No, looking at phones is not doing anything. In fact, this is something I love to share always. I did this WhatsApp survey with all my, whoever I had on my WhatsApp. I asked them, do you just eat? Just a simple question. And everyone was, yes, of course we do. We just eat. That was a yes which came. So I sent back a question. Do you just eat minus phone, minus book, minus any screen, minus, like really talking to someone or running around? Barely a few got back saying yes.
Barely a few ones.
Yeah, so just a thing tells us that we're not giving the respect to the food that it deserves. So if you're not respecting it, it is not going to go in and do the job it is supposed to. Even if you're buying the most expensive or organic foods, whatever, you could afford, or whatever information you have, you're trying to eat according to that. But if you're not covering these other aspects of holistic eating, you are not doing the job at all. So this is very important. Slowing down again is very important. Fasting is also one form of slowing down, which is the physical form of slowing down. Mental slowing down is mental fast, which is what I call it. Again, very important. Now people need mindfulness coaches. What is mindfulness? To just go and sit out in your balcony with a book. Don't even read it. Just sit there. Let your mind wander. That is mindfulness. What will happen if you take out half an hour like this? Nothing will happen. Let your mind wander. Doesn't matter. It will wander. It's job to wander. But that half an hour every day, everyone needs to take out. I just feel it's everyone's.
Yeah. It's amazing to talk to you, ma'am. Ma'am, when reading your book, I found you have given very practical tips as to how to start your day, how to boost your metabolism with the first water you take in the day. So, since your readers are here, can we have some easy tips which they can incorporate in their daily life?
Yeah, so simple things. The morning ritual is very important. When you get up in the morning, the first thing you put in your body literally shapes your day. So hydrate yourself first. Most important. Eat something, have something alkaline, and good fat. Alkaline and good fat should be your morning things. So maybe you could do lemon water, warm 1 cup of water with just 1/4 or half a lemon in it. With a bit, if you you can probably do a pinch of cinnamon as well. I give it to most people because most of us have inflammation and most of us have that sugars on the border. So I put a little bit of a pinch of cinnamon in it. And then you could probably do some nuts, which is again such an age-old thing. बादाम साथ सुबह खाना है तो खाना है. Questions क्यों करो? मत करो ना. अब तो science भी आ गया है. Science tells us that starting your day with good fat is just the right way to do it. So instead of doing the newfangled things like coconut oil, or ghee first thing in the morning, why not stick to the age-old thing of doing 7 almonds or 10 almonds, starting your day with that. Along with good fat, you're also getting fiber, you're also getting multiple nutrients, and you're covering a lot of minerals, right in the morning. Okay. But if you don't want almonds, then maybe even any other nut, but start with good fat is what I'm trying to say. So that is very, very important. And then your meal, your chai or whatever coffee you want should come after that. You can't start your day. Would you like it that if you opened your eyes and somebody just screamed at you? You would not. No one would like it because it will send your body into a shock. Your mind into a shock, and there'll be severe stress. If you start your day with a strong cup of coffee or tea, which has so much caffeine in it and which is acidic, that is exactly what you're doing to your stomach. Do not do that. Prepare a layer. I'm not saying don't have tea and coffee. There is enough benefit of having tea and coffee. We all know that tea and coffee is good for us, but had the right way. I've put up a ring because a lot of people used to ask me, आप चाय को मना करते हो? ऐसे चाय किसी को मना नहीं होती, but चाय का पीने का तरीका होता है. I also have my cup of morning tea, but I make it into a vehicle of health. I put like maybe 10 things in it. Then I feel very good about it. So my chai in the morning has adrak. My chai in the morning has black pepper. My chai in the morning has long. So I boil water with all these things. Barely put a little bit of milk, but that is me. You could put milk because I can't handle milk. I'm lactose intolerant, so I put barely any milk. But you can definitely put milk later, but don't boil after that. So once you've boiled your tea leaves and everything, just put a little bit of milk in it, or whatever amount of milk you want in it, and have it. You can even have your kadawa chai. I don't care, but not first thing in the morning, because that gives you happiness. Because you have to keep all rules together, na? You have to keep the happiness rule also together. If I take away chai from someone who only feels happy after chai, why would I do that? Right? So these things are very, very important. Then earlier rules of, like I am such a strict believer of morning walk. In fact, that chapter is there also in my book. I believe one should do the morning walk. Fine, you can't. You can do it in the evening as well. But the morning walk has its own benefits. One, you get the first morning sun, you get the vitamin D. Instead of if you're doing it at 8 o'clock at night. Even I do it when I can't do it in the morning. I do it instead of skipping, you must do it. So I do it in the evening as well. So morning walk, having onions, and because these are, see, the book has habits which are very practical and very, things you can put in your life very easily. So those are not difficult things I'm trying to do that you have to pay a penance, you have to go 10 days away and do this kind of a diet. No. Every single habit is very easily doable. You just have to want to do it. So I tell everyone the way to read the book is to pick up maybe say a couple of habits first, 3-4 of those. And first incorporate those in your diet. Let them become automatic. And then move to the next 5 and try and get them in your diet. And if you do that, and if you can manage to inculcate even 10 out of those multiple habits that I've put in the book, your health would thank you. You'll be in a much better status. And then you'll teach your children, because they learn by exam. I just feel they learn by exam.
It is really wonderful talking to you, but I think time permits us for this session only. So thank you, Kavita, for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. Ultimate Grandmother Hacks offer a valuable perspective on integrating traditional habits into our modern lives for better health and well-being. To our audience, thank you for joining, and we hope you find this discussion enriching. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.